Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome back. We are so excited to once again receive so much encouraging, uplifting, and insightful feedback. So many different places where people are connecting with this podcast, whether it's on Spotify, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, like you name it, where you get podcasts, where's that? Please be generous and continue to share. It is fascinating to just hear from beginning of careers to those at the end of their careers or even finish their career, recounting similar stories and reaching out with great anecdotes, as well as even some fantastic suggestions for some potential guests coming up in season 3. Today is no different. Another wonderful peer who has a phenomenal story and a great sense of humor. I am excited to have Jeff Hogan join us today. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be here.
Man, it's a pleasure. We love having all kinds of backgrounds and perspectives here on Perusings, the Power of Values. I am 100% certain that today will also be an insightful one, just because, you're Jeff Hogan. What else could we ask for? This is some hilarious stuff. So Jeff, we love to ask the same question to kick off every single podcast, and that is, so were you born this way, or how did you get into the appraisal evaluation profession?
Yes, actually I was. I came out of the womb and went straight into start measuring houses. And no.
That's an impressive crawler. Is all I can say. A little onesie with a little tape measure across the front of her.
Exactly. No.
Totally get it.
So no, I probably like a lot of people. I would say to some degree I was unique in the sense that that was appraising. Real estate appraising was actually my first real job out of college. So I was,
oh wow,
yeah. I know that's kind of rare. Most people, it's second career, maybe third career, but I actually was in college, just about to graduate, and I was planning to go into finance. I had a finance degree. I was going to work as a stockbroker, financial planner, something in that degree. And my father actually had a income property in Los Angeles that he was getting appraised.
Right.
He was there at the property and met the appraiser and said, "Hey, my son needs a job. How does he get in this appraising thing?" Right? And he says, "Oh, have him call." It's been 35 years ago. I don't remember the guy's name. I don't think I ever met him in person. So I called him. He said, "Hey, call this person, another person, which I can't remember the name. They have a training program that they're starting at Home Savings. Home Savings alone was a big regional company out here in California at the time where I was working, where I was living. And so they had a training program. They would run through every month or every couple of months, something like 20, 25 appraisers, trainees. And they paid a salary, because a lot of jobs I was looking at,
they paid a salary.
I was like, this salary.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Oh,
yes. So the jobs I was looking at, stockbroker, financial planner, insurance salespeople, I was actually looking at maybe being a mortgage broker or real estate agent, all commission stuff, right? All commission. I was like, okay, I need to make some money. So they offered a salary, and believe it or not, they actually offered a company car.
Oh my goodness. So, are they hiring right now? Come on. I know they're no longer in existence, which is even funnier.
Yeah. So, but that was a cool op. And so here I am, 22 years old, just out of college. I'm driving around in a company car. I got a salary. I'm praising people's house. So I was loving life. It was a great gig. And I knew nothing about appraising. Didn't know anything about really that much about real estate, really, to that point in my life. And which I think is pretty ironic, because I'm out here doing appraisals on people's homes, and I don't know, values of homes or how important this transaction is to them buying the biggest investment in their life. Hey, I don't care about that. I'm just checking boxes. At that time, we literally were writing the appraisals up on paper. They weren't even typed, because Home Savings have their own style of doing appraisals. So you would actually handwrite it on an actual folder that would have the property information. You put your adjustments, and did it in pencil. You did it in pencil.
You got to do it in pencil.
Because you went back to the office, and your supervisor, your chief appraiser supervisor at that office would go back and erase it and put their own stuff on there, and they'd make the final call. So I did that for a number of years, just getting my feet wet in the business. And then it was very cookie cutter stuff. I was doing stuff in doing appraisals in very conforming areas in Orange County and LA County. So they were pretty quick and pretty easy to do. So for me, it was the best job in the world. And I will tell you, ironically, this is kind of leads back to some stuff we're probably going to talk about later. I actually thought to myself, do you really need an appraiser to do this? Because I was just checking boxes, and I was doing some adjustments, obviously here or there, but I had my preset list of adjustments. I had my $25, my $25, $50 square footage. I had my bedroom adjustment. I knew that number. I think I was $3,000 or $2,000. I had my bathroom adjustment. I think it was like $1,500. So I would just plug those numbers in. I'm like, dang, this is easy. That's how I was trained. That was my entry into the business.
I just want to say, Jeff, I'm so glad that you hand wrote a copy of those adjustments, and you're still doing a good job today.
That's right. I stick with it.
I'm grateful.
I started, that was 87, 88, and I still have those notes, and I still use them today.
And the good news is, I mean, they're probably almost as good as other people's adjustments.
Absolutely.
I mean, all kinds of fun.
Things haven't changed all that much.
So what was it like coming into a group? I mean, so you had, was it like what you see today with like the Geico car where you have like the big branding on the side, or is it just a nondescript car?
A nondescript car. It was a Chevy Nova. You had a Chevy Nova or a Toyota. I think Toyota Tercel and Chevy Nova kind of were the same brand. They just put a different logo on. Both made in Mexico, I believe, and they would just, rebrand it. But it was it was brand new. They gave us a gas card. It was just the greatest thing ever, I'm telling you. And I was driving around all my friends who, a lot of my friends either didn't have jobs or just getting jobs. And I'm like, man, you're big time. So, but it was fun.
That's phenomenal. So what was training like back in the day? I mean, This is amazing. You use something called a pencil. I mean, these days people think like the magic pencil from their Apple iPad, but they have no idea what you're talking about. Like this thing has like lead inside of it, not the type from lead paint, but it has an eraser on the back, not a magic eraser.
So because this company, Home Savings, kind of pretty much portfolioed all their loans, and so they didn't really they weren't selling loans to the GSEs or anything like that. So they had their own format, their own forms, their own process. And so it was very, very simple. And I really did not know I worked there for like a year or two. And I didn't realize at that point that there was a whole nother aspect of appraising that involved doing uniform appraisal forms. There was, this URAR thing. I'd never heard of that, hadn't seen it. But I said, you're not using that. You're not using a URA. I said, what is a URA? What is a 10004? So I found out what that was, and my friend, a good friend, said, "You need to start doing real appraisals." I'm like, "Well, aren't I doing real appraisals?" He said, "No." So I actually got a job working for another institute, another bank, and that's when I got introduced to actually doing appraisals on forms. And we actually had at that company we had two things. We had a typist who would actually, you write it up. You still hand wrote it.
Sure.
But he had a typist that would type it out. And then we also upgraded to the dot matrix printer that would actually, put the little dot things on the side. You'd screw it in there, make sure it lined up, and you'd line it up onto the dot matrix printer, and it would go across. So that was revolutionary back in 1989, 1990.
So what type of visual apparatus did you use to capture what you saw?
So we did have cameras.
All right.
But they were the kind where you'd actually have to go to the Photoshop, and you would get there was no digital camera, so you just take
so you're doing film.
You take that film, that roll of film, to the 1 hour Photoshop, and then you either pick it up, or if it was a really good one, they really they deliver it, because that was a big part of their business, was doing those appraisal photos. And so so then we take our nice little glue stick or our nice little tape and glue those pictures on there, and off we went.
I think that's amazing, because I mean, this whole idea of the technology that you add. I mean, when you think about it, at the point in time you came into the industry, whether people reflect on it this way or not, you had a visual capability to capture what you saw. You had an ability to increase your output speed by, you had a standardized approach toward gathering information. someone else actually who was actually proficient at typing, not to say you weren't, but someone who
Still not.
did that. It's still not exactly. Oh yeah, where's we hit the wrong button. And then using printing technology. I mean, this was an impressive way. And thank goodness that your friend got you out of that car and over to some real appraisers.
I still got the car. I still got a car at the new place. I got a car at the new place. I got a new job.
I'm hanging out with you from now on. Nobody giving me cars. I'm like, oh man, that's something else. That's phenomenal. And so did you just come right into a role, or did you go through more training? What was it like moving to?
So there was definitely some more training. And I remember going at this, when I worked at this company, it was combination. It was a small company, and they actually had small bank, actually regional bank.
Okay.
And they actually had they had commercial and residential appraisals all in the same office. So that's when I got exposed to the whole idea that there was a whole commercial appraisal, our general, what they were called general. They're just called commercial appraisers back then. So what I did was, what was cool was I said, hey, you need to get a designation. I was like, what's a designation? They said, wow, yeah, you can get at this time. They said, well, most people start off to get their RM with the Institute, right? Residential member. And then you go up to an MAI. I was like, what's an MAI? And I'd heard that term MAI. Oh, yeah, they're top of the line, blah, blah, blah. I said, oh, that sounds cool. I want to be an MAI. I said, well, hold up. Get your RM first and then get that. I said, okay, cool. So I actually started taking classes with the Institute back in 1989, 88, 89, working toward my RM designation, because at that time there was no way really to distinguish one appraiser from another. There was no other real, there's no licensing. So I'm thinking, well, I want to do something that kind of make myself stand out. So I remember going to appraisal class, I remember going to my first Appraisal Institute class. And all I remember was I walked in. It was a big room. This is when the Institute was big. So they had probably, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 people in this class. We met every week. I think we met every Saturday for it was principal. So I think we met for 8 weeks. And I had to drive to LA. I lived in Orange County. So it was an hour drive, but it was on a Saturday. And I remember going to this class, and there were all these older guys there, even then. And I was young then. I'm old now, but I was young then. And I just remember older white guys going, what kind of class is this? What am I getting into? I remember kind of wanting to maybe leave. And I was like, it was at a break time. I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is for me. And I remember a guy pulled me aside, goes, hey, introduced himself, told me, trying to basically talk me into staying. I went up and staying, and I think I'd also gone to a couple of Institute meetings as well. Kind of didn't get the vibe, didn't get a real friendly vibe there.
So Jeff, I'm not saying that this has ever happened to anyone else like me, but if it had, what was it like for you walking into a room where you don't know anybody,
right?
You haven't been in the profession for a while, maybe it was at least in the general area that you live, so at least there was some kind of some minor similarity, but I don't know that everyone understands just how intimidating that experience might be.
Yeah. I absolutely, I really, because I was young, because I was new, because I didn't really understand, and they were even using terms I hadn't heard or hadn't used, because appraisals has a lot of lingo that we use that people don't understand. It's a lot of acronyms and things. So I hadn't exposed that. So for me, it was definitely intimidating to some degree, for sure. And I had to decide on myself, is this something I really want to do? And if it is, this person that called me kind of took me aside, said, hey, this is, there's a lot more opportunities in this profession that you probably don't know about. And I'm like, I just measure houses. I write down what I see and, do the whole thing. So it took me a little while to kind of get used to the fact that, I don't look like them. I'm not the same age as them. I just kind of settled into that. And it was kind of part of my upbringing as well. I mean, I was born in Los Angeles, LA area, lived most of my life in Los Angeles until I got to high school. When I got to high school, my parents moved me to Orange County, which is an all white area. And
oh wow!
And for those that don't know, I'm not white, but
you know what, Jeff, you sound good. That's all I can tell you.
So yeah, so I had already kind of experienced that already coming into going into high school, then going into college. So I wasn't that intimidated by being around people that didn't necessarily look like me, but this was also. They were older than me. They clearly had more experience than I did. So I kind of felt a little bit of a pressure. But being the only African-American in a class was not new to me. That started in high school. So being the only one in an appraisal class didn't bother me. Now, would I have liked to see some other people that were of color? Sure, but it wasn't an option, so that didn't deter me. So yeah. But anyway, yeah, it was good. I learned a lot, and turns out that I'm glad I did that, because when licensing did hit, which was like a year or so later, I'd already had the classes because I was working on this RM, so those qualified. So all to do was take the test. And I remember when licensing happened, everybody was scrambling to get their education. I didn't have to do that because I'd already taken more than enough hours to do that. So it was cool. So yeah, but that was it was a good experience for me, actually.
What an amazing opportunity that you were fortunate enough early on for someone to mention that. A lot of people don't get a sense of the importance of connecting with people from not only different backgrounds, different experiences,
right.
Different times in the industry. I mean, it sounded like someone jokingly said to me once in a Chicago session I walked into, they're like, hey, it's got like a VFW all. I'm like, might be, might not. I don't know. And then when I went to, I'm like, kind of was actually. But the decades of experience are there. And hopefully some people, sound like at least one, maybe more, took a little time, a little effort to reach out to you and just say, hey, you're maybe intimidating, but you're not alone and there's a big opportunity. How long did you stay with that amazing camera with film and a company car and a dot matrix printer? I mean, it's pretty impressive. Did you stay there for a while or did you have to move away?
That company wound up, because at that time, this is like early 90s. There's a lot of consolidation going on in the industry at that time. So that company actually got merged with somebody else, kind of like does happen now too. So we wound up shutting down that office, and all of us kind of basically got laid off. So that was the first of many layoffs in my career, because I'm still, but to lesser degree now. Our business as an appraiser, if you're doing mortgage lending stuff, is really, really based on interest rates, right? And interest rates go up, volume goes down. Interest rates go down, volume goes up. So I was kind of on that roller coaster for a lot of my career. I can't even remember how many times either I left or got asked to leave because of the lack of work or not enough work, or we're shutting down, we're merging. So you have a relationship with a particular person, because I did go on my own soon after that, and I said, hey,
oh, you did?
Yeah, okay. I said, I can do this. And I was 20, I think I was 26, 27. I said, I'm just go become my own appraiser. I don't need to work for anybody. So I did that. And what I didn't realize, I know you're going to ask something about this later, but I'll just bring this up now. One of the things I realized later that I didn't know then is, as an independent appraiser, you are, a friend told me this, but I didn't understand it because I was, again, in my 20s. I was going to have the Hogan appraisal, just a whole, monstrosity, big building, big enterprise, right? But what I didn't realize was he told me that, he said, Jeff, when you're an appraiser running your business, you're a businessman first and appraisal second. I didn't even know what that meant. All I thought was, if I did a good job on appraising, did a great quality work, turned it in on time, the work was just going to keep flowing in.
Oh my God. That's the way it's supposed to be, isn't it, Jeff? I mean, I believe that's the way it is.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. So I would sit by this thing called a fax machine.
Now, Jeff, not everybody joining us has the wisdom, Jeff, to know what a facsimile machine is. Try to describe that.
Oh my God. So it's this crazy device that makes a lot of noise that's plugged into your phone jack. And instead of you making phone calls on it, which you could, I think, on a fax machine, but it would spit out information related to an assignment, new work. You could send work that way. You would send your appraisals through the fax machine, and it created this wacky, very unclear facsimile of what you put into it. And it made it on this weird paper, this kind of weird paper thing. It's hard to explain. Anyway, it was archaic, but it was top-notch technology at the time.
It was top-notch. I mean, you mentioned something that probably blew people's minds. You said there was a phone jack. They don't know a guy named Jack. Who's Jack the phone? I mean, it's pretty good stuff.
Exactly.
So for those of you having a little difficulty with this, where you plug your little power cord in to get a little juice? You're not doing your remote charging. Where you plug it into the wall, there used to be a little plug in the wall that you put a special kind of plug, might be an RG45 in the wall. And then it went to what looked kind of like maybe one of your multifunction printers, scanners these days. Kind of looked like that.
Yeah.
And when you fed it in, like the feeder on your scanner, in this case, it actually read it the way it would do the scan, but instead of printing something out, it actually sent it across that phone line to another connected line that also had a facsimile machine. and it made a duplicate of what you scanned. And as Jeff said, it was on waxy rolled paper that would disintegrate over time. You couldn't see it, and you barely could read it. But it literally gave someone, it's kind of like mail, but like immediate. It was pretty phenomenal stuff. So, I mean, you went big time. You gave up a car and instead got a facsimile machine.
That's right. That's right.
Ooh.
That's right. That's right.
So I love the fact that you sat there by the fax machine and just waited for it to, ring, because it would like ring and then it would start printing out and you get all excited. You must have needed multiple fax machines.
I wish that was the case. So a couple things I did that I would do differently that I did at the time. First of all, I had one client and I thought that was plenty. They were giving me plenty of work. In fact, that's why I did it. It was a friend of mine that was working for Ford Motor Company. That back in the Ford, the auto dealers wanted to be banks. Everybody wanted to be a bank. So they started their own bank. Ford started their own bank. And I was working for a branch owned by Ford Motor Company. I was doing a good amount of work for them. I was like their primary appraiser for this certain area. Really enjoyed it. And I got to be kind of independent, but I really wasn't because I was working for one client, but I was independent. I had a few other clients, but one of the things I did not do, as I was talking about being a business owner, was one, I didn't diversify and get other clients because I got one client, I'm good. The second thing was being a business person is, there's this aspect of doing marketing.
That's something else.
Yeah, you have to do marketing, you have to do customer service, meaning you have to make connections with people and go back in those days, we'd actually go visit the office.
Wait a minute, what's a visit? Is that like is that like FaceTime?
No. A live person to person, you'd actually take your orders to the office and you'd meet the people assigning work, you get to know them and take them lunch and or See's candy. They really like See's candy. So we take See's candy at Christmas. So that's the kind of things I did not really do at the front end. And my friends did. And that, for some reason, they'd always walk out with a few new orders, right? You go in, drop off 2 or 3, come back with 3 or 4. So I was just sitting by my fax machine while the business people who were appraisers would actually make contacts and travel, and they'd go and meet with them. So that was, and marketing. I didn't do any marketing. I didn't go out and present myself to anybody else, even tell them I was an appraiser, So I think there were those things that I think a successful business owner does. You don't even have to be the best appraiser, but if you're a good business owner, you'll have more work sometimes than the best appraisers, just because that person understands business. I didn't even understand accounting, taxes, all this other stuff. It's like, wait, I just thought I just do appraisal. No, you have to pay quarterly taxes. What? What's that? So I just didn't have a lot of that. And to be honest with you, a lot of that had to do with me not coming from a family or a background where they were business owners. So I didn't know that. If I had that background, my dad was a business owner or an uncle or something, I didn't have that. So I didn't have any of that. So I just thought, I'll do good appraisals, I'll get plenty of work, and everything's going to work out great. That was a big learning curve for me early on in my career.
Such an important point to touch on that a lot of people aren't aware of. And one of the challenges that happens when you go out on your own and, as you invest in some equipment, some technology to improve the process, actions that take, and not necessarily knowing which ones are going to produce results or that they even produce results at all. Did you stay solo or did you also get yourself like a typist that you'd worked with before or trainee?
Yeah, you know what? I did. I brought on my sister-in-law became my office assistant, so to speak. So I learned some things from when I did work at a bank because they would have people that would actually prep the appraisals for you. So they'd pull comps from back in the, I'm going to bring up another old term, a microfiche machine. So I had a microfiche machine that I would go to and pull my comps.
Wait a minute. Did you go to the Smithsonian, Jeff?
Exactly. I mean, that's where this was.
So you're gonna have to get some visual. Come on, man. Give me a sense of what we're talking about right now.
So the microfiche machine was a bunch of little film that you would go and you'd actually pull this little. They were like little cards. So you'd pull them on a little. You take the little screen based on what you're looking for. And so it would be a particular subject property. It'd have a certain APN number, right? So you take that APN, you search that. Here's where that property is. You put that on a little device that would make a photo of that microfiche list, which would have the subject property information, it would have a lot of information, and you'd have another one that had comp information. So you go back to another one. So you just print all this stuff out, and that would be how you would start your appraisal. You have your subject property, you look at your plat map, and you also have some sales. All that was delivered to you through this service that was send it, I think monthly, they'd send you updates on, not on the subject property, but you get updates on comps and comparables. So that's really what that person would do. And they'd also print out a copy of my Thomas Guy page that would let me know where my subject was. And so I'd have all that stuff together. It's basically a little kit, a little package where I'd have all my basic information, contact information, my sales, my lot size, my plat map, and all that stuff. So I had somebody help me with that. And also I'd have to package it at the end, right? I have to put the photos on there. I have to show where my comparables were with my little forms and worms, etch a sketch with my comps on the Thomas Guy page. So it was pretty labor intensive back then, to do an appraisal. And you needed so I had a couple people that would come in and help. My sister-in-law, my sister, a couple kids I knew from college that were in college, kids that were still in school. I have them come over. So depending on how busy I was, right? I just pay them a little hourly rate, and they'd come in and help me basically put together these packages, either for me to do the appraisal or after I did the appraisal to help me package it so I could send it off, hard copy, mail it to the client, FedEx.
Oh man, that just helped frame up, Jeff, the amount of work that had to go on to just get one appraisal report out the door.
Oh yeah, very time intensive.
And then you needed to seize candy just to help make sure that they actually saw your report in a favorable light.
Yeah, that's right. Or make sure I got more work. That was for getting more work.
That is totally the case. So did you stay independent for the rest of your career, or did new opportunities open up? I mean,
unfortunately, I did not.
Or did you lay yourself off? I mean, you mentioned this happens multiple times in your career.
Well, what happened was that, again, having one client at the time, basically I had maybe one and a half. That client, and this happens a lot in those days, is my contact, who I was working with, went to another company. So the person that took over didn't have a relationship with me, had their own people that they liked. And I, didn't matter how good of an appraiser I was. Back in those days, the loan officers, when they traveled, they would have their own appraisal crew that they would basically take with them as part of their package of, you want to bring this loan officer in, you got to bring their appraiser, you got to bring their processor, you got to bring their underwriter, so that, this is before appraiser independence. So you could come in and say, hey, so I was still approved to do work for them, but, this new person that came in brought their own group. And that happens a lot. And in addition to that, I had a couple of clients that were also merged with other banks. And then that chief appraiser, that person that was giving out the work, was no longer there and didn't know me. So, it was a lot of that kind of thing that would happen at that time to a lot of appraisers. So again, with not a lot of diversity within my client base, that led me to go, you know what, I need to get back into a kind of a more of a job where I was more of a staff appraiser or, a salary position. Because I had little kids at that time. So it's like, you need a real job. It was fun. It's nice playing like you have a business. My wife is like, but you need to get a real job now. It was,
that rings so true. I think many of us have heard that experience before, play versus work. I just don't think they appreciate it. Nonetheless, it sounded like your home boss gave you some marching orders. Where did that march you off?
It was good. It was some good advice. I went and worked for, at that time, what was Security Pacific Bank, which became part of Bank of America, and kind of went back in that direction, working as a staff appraiser, became a reviewer, later became a manager, because I just had more of at this point, and I'm like 10 years in at this point, but in between there, I forgot a big step of that. Between all that happening, when my business officially shut down, because I still kind of had it going, but it wasn't making enough money.
Sure.
So I needed another job. So I actually went into sales. I actually was thinking I'm done with appraising, because remember, I'd got into it right after college. So I hadn't really done anything else. So I did my career change after becoming an appraiser. Most people do things and then become an appraiser. I was an appraiser, and then I left appraising. I had some really good I thought I was a good salesperson because, I talk a lot. So I'm thinking I can sell. It's no big deal. So I think my first job was at GTE selling the phone. I was selling ads in the yellow pages. Now don't try to give explanations for all this old stuff, but the yellow pages.
No, I mean,
the yellow pages was pre-internet. Pre-internet. People wanted to find something. They went to the yellow pages. And so I was selling yellow pages. God, I sound like 100 years old. So I was selling yellow page ads. And then also the internet was just coming out. So we give them a free listing on the internet. But most business owners had no idea what that was. Like, I don't know, what's the internet? So you get a free ad on the internet. We'll post it on the internet. Now, granted, there was no Google. There was no Yahoo. They were just like, you'd have to type in exact wording for everything that you wanted to get. HTTP. If you missed it, you couldn't find it. There was no, form autofill or nothing like that. So most of these business owners didn't care anything about the internet or being online. So because they want to use their books. People were using books. I don't even have Yellow Pages anymore because, you don't need it. But I was selling Yellow Page ads, did pretty good at that. And then I went and became a salesperson for ADP selling payroll services, which was cool. I liked that job because I was back in the field. I was still doing appraising, by the way, still appraising on the side.
Okay.
But it wasn't full time. And that sometimes you have to do that, in your career. When things get slow, you gotta get another gig, and you gotta keep I recommend everybody keep their license. I almost let mine lapse because I wasn't keeping track of it. And I remember calling. My license was going to expire. This is before we had things where you could send it in electronically. You have to send everything manually,
of course,
to the state board. I'm in California. So I remember my license was about to expire. I had like 2 weeks to turn it in. I'm like, oh my God. And that's when it's like, you got to give us 90 days or 60 days. Ooh. So it was like, and I was debating, like, so I didn't want to bother with this. I was doing pretty good on my sales job, and saying, I don't want to mess with this appraisal thing. And I remember a friend said, you got to keep your license. So I went on and did it, and I remember calling a friend of mine who said, you need to call, because it wasn't going to make it. So I said, you need to call John Brennan, because at that time, John Brennan was in the state of California. He was working for the OREA. He had used to work for Bank of America, so we knew each other through Bank of America. So I called John and said, John, I need you to find somebody to get my license approved. And he said, okay, let me make some calls. And he made a couple of calls for him on my behalf, and I was able to keep my license. But that at that point, I just was kind of almost out of the profession. And I did the sales thing for a few years, and it was the reason I got out of sales. I'll never forget. I had made a big sale, one of my biggest sales ever at ADP. I had because they base everything on head count, right? So
how about head count? Yeah, because that's how they generate their revenue.
Yeah, how many employees? So this particular employee that I saw, and I was working at that time. I was working South Central Los Angeles, so I was working with a lot of small clients, small businesses that really hadn't, they were paying people under the table. And I was like, hey, you need to be legit. We'll set up your payroll, we'll set up your taxes, and that's what ADP did. So, but I had this one big client, and so we had everything set. I want to say it was like 100 employees. I was going to make a fortune. I was going to make a lot of money on this client. Because you make money when you start them up, but then you also make money every month. You get like a residual every time.
Oh, residuals.
Yeah, you get residuals. Nice. You have to keep them happy, and then you sell them other products. At that time, the cool thing to have was direct deposit. Oh, wow, direct deposit. I don't have to write checks. No, direct deposit. You have to write checks. You have to go to the bank. So we were selling direct deposit as this new feature. And we had this client, and we went there. I went there with my manager. So my manager's like, okay, I want to make sure you sign all this paperwork, right? It's a 100 employee deal. I had only been doing this for like a year or so. So we go there, and the client I go in there and said, okay, I look at the client, and it was a guy. He had a look on his face, like his face was totally pale. I'm like, uh-oh, this ain't good. He goes, Jeff, I'm so sorry. He said, we are going to have to shut down our business. I said, are you kidding me? This was like 1990, late 1990, but there was some crisis he was a manufacturer, and there was a crisis in China. This guy was a Chinese guy. He was an import-export guy, and they had to shut down because there was an embargo with America and China at this time, where his business she couldn't do any work. So I said, we can't do it. We're going to probably shut down. I was so devastated because they were patting me on the back. I was going to meetings. I was getting awards because I signed this big client. We're just going to do this big celebration. And at that same day, a good friend of mine, Ken Stevens, called me and said, hey, Jeff, we got an opening here at Bank of America for appraiser. And I said, I'm in. So that's how I got back in.
That's more. Oh my
goodness. So after 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 years in the wilderness of sales, I was back in with the phone call and a bad sales day, which that's how sales is. You can have a good day and a bad day. One bad sales day, I was like, you know what, I'm getting out. So I got back in, and I've been in ever since. Back at working at Bank of America up until
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Man, that is just a vivid story. What an amazing experience you've had along the way to help get things done, and the resourcefulness that you've had to keep moving through the challenges that came up. I mean, that's Like, so have you gone on and stayed at Bank of America the whole time? Here, you know what might be interesting for people? Because you've had business experience and, like you said, you're getting to sell for the yellow pages, ADP. I mean, ADP is known as really being a sales organization. And that's not normally the description that people would use for an individual in and around the appraisal profession. How in that time period, I mean, we're talking now more than a decade, how did appraisal change for you, and how did you change in the industry over this period in your career?
Yeah, so a lot of things had changed. Digital cameras were around at that. They were early entrant, but they had digital cameras, a lot more computer software that had, a lot more features. Digital sketch programs were just, were kind of the norm at that point, because I was still doing the old measuring sketch and making it. But so digital sketches where you have the sketch was done on as part of the software, and PDFs, their PDFs were big. People could now send an appraisal, email it without having to do a hard copy. So all those things were just starting to take a hold in the kind of like the early 90s, and I got back, or mid 90s at this point, like mid to late 90s. So yeah, so that was a big change for me, which was really cool because you could actually be a lot more efficient than when I was doing it back in the old days. And you had a location map that you didn't have to create with a bunch of squares and dots and arrows. It was already built in. So the software, I'd say, was the biggest change. The appraisal software that really kind of revolutionized the speed and the efficiency, along with the PDFs and things that made it easier to do appraisals. So yeah, and some of the rules to check things were also there as well. You can double check things like adjustments. Did you sign the report? Would remind you things that you probably would forget. So I liked a lot of those changes, and that's nothing compared to now. There's just so many different things that have made the appraisal profession a lot more proficient, and make us proficient as appraisers.
Phenomenal approach. And maybe would be interesting to hear as well is, how did you advance your technology as an appraiser? Like, you've got your knowledge as a human being, and you've obviously been around the industry in some different roles. It's one thing to have technology that supports you. It's another to actually update your own kind of knowledge technology. How did you handle that from going, like you said, that original RM path and being informed kind of early on with designation? Any particular investments or actions that you took along the way?
There's some training classes. I forgot what I use. I think I use a la mode. I use some other class. A lot of them offer classes and training. So I would go and actually take some of those training classes when they offered them, so that I could be up to speed on what was going on. I was always one of those first. I like to be kind of first to try stuff like that. I just like technology, so I would always be one of the first ones to jump in. Some technology it still needed some work, but I just liked it because to me it was fun to learn how to do new stuff like that.
That's phenomenal.
Whether it was a sketch, whether it was uploading certain things into the appraisal or into the documents, and scanning things and putting that in. I just enjoyed that. So for me, that was the fun part, because it gave me a little bit of a challenge.
And given the challenge, and you mentioned you made a humorous reference earlier, and I think anyone's been around the industry may have had that experience, that sometimes you're employed and sometimes you're unemployed. How was life for you in and around 2007, going into the great financial crisis?
Interestingly enough, at that time, I was with Bank of America, and we had just been purchased by, take that back. I was with Bank of America, then I went to LandSafe/Countrywide.
Oh, okay.
And then soon after that, Bank of America bought Countrywide. So
everywhere you go with it, like Bank of America, you must have a Bank of America tattoo on your body.
This is like my third different, experience with Bank of America, because I literally left, and it was less than a year later that Bank of America purchased Countrywide. So I was working with some of the same people that I've been working with at Bank of America. But so at that time, we were kind of doing okay. I mean, there were layoffs at that time because we were merging two different appraisal companies between LandSafe and Bank of America. And we actually had two supervisors in areas, two managers, too many appraisers. So we did wind up having to lay some folks off. But I think what saved me actually was because I was kind of a bridge between the two, because I worked for Bank of America. and I worked for Countrywide. So I think I was brought in on a lot of calls just to discuss, hey, how does B of A do things? How does Landsafe do things? And how do we, Landsafe / Countrywide. So I was able to kind of help in that regard. And so that was good for me. So I absolutely was able to, one of the fortunate ones that was able to keep my job through that mortgage kind of meltdown area time frame.
That's fantastic. That is, it's great to be that kind of bridge between them. And what type of role were you in at this point and interacting with appraisal professionals and peers?
Yeah, so I was a manager at this point. So I had got into management. And I think one of the reasons I got into management was because unlike a lot of appraisers that I worked with, they didn't really have any interest in being in management. I mean, they just liked doing appraisals, staying at the field, didn't really have the personality, I would say, to manage. I mean, it's a different skill set than being an appraiser. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of appraisers, unfortunately, because they're good appraisers, they make them managers. And that doesn't always work out well for them or their people they work for. So I think it's good to have a experience where, and my sales experience came into play. I learned a lot about people, working with people, because here's the interesting thing about going back to the sales job. I remember as an appraiser, I would call people to set an appointment. And they were eager, like, sure, when can you meet me? Yeah, I'll meet some. You call people on a sales call, it's like, I'm not available. I'm not interested. They're like, wait a minute, I'm calling you for I got some good information to tell you, and I'd have to make calls, and I wasn't used to that. I'm used to people bending over backwards to meet with me, and here I'm calling people, they're like, I don't know who you are. No, we're not interested, So it was just a weird kind of change from what I was used to, but I learned some stuff. I learned how to be a better communicator and relate to people a little bit better.
That's phenomenal. And then, I think that's such a wonderful example of being able to draw upon different experiences and different backgrounds that not everyone has. What are some of those, is there one particular story that stands out and you're like, oh man, that one time, like here, just, like you just shared, just really brought it home for me in this role that you were able to maybe accomplish some results that other people couldn't, or you're just like, oh man, I think I wet the bed. I mean, because we all have this kind of experiences.
I've had both where I had appraisal. I've had experiences where because of my experience on the sales side, I've had to sometimes, especially as a manager, be able to communicate with a borrower or a lender or an underwriter in a way that wasn't condescending, kind of explaining things in a way that they could understand them versus just being like, hey, I'm the appraiser. This is my value. Take it or leave it. There's those certain people like that. So I think being able to mix in that sales aspect of it, that, hey, we're trying to keep this customer, this client happy. And because I was in sales, I'll tell you the biggest difference, biggest impact on me with sales is I really, for the first time, understood how hard it was for a person in sales to get a deal, like to get a loan, like it's a lot. So I understood, like, this is important. This is not like as an appraiser, you don't really care about this, really care that much about sales or how they got the loan. You just send a fax machine, the order just comes in. But because I was in sales, I actually understood that loan officer's perspective. And if you tell them we're not going to make this loan, or the value's not there, or this needs to be fixed, or we're not going to do it, blah, 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 that can have a big impact on their income. Versus an appraiser, it's just one other appraisal, big deal, right? So I think that empathy, when I became a manager, most loan officers appreciated that because I could understand. I say, look, I understand this is important. I know it's a big deal. I know we're trying to make this loan for you, but here's the issues that we have to deal with. And we would work it out. Sometimes there could be a change in something in the appraisal. Sometimes there'd be a change on the loan side.
Yes.
But we're generally in the discussion in a positive note. Like here's we've done all we can do on our end based on the value, based on the situation, based on the property. But, we're going to do all we can. And so when we do that, I feel that the loan officer or whoever the mortgage banker feels like, hey, this person at least has some empathy from my perspective. And so it was always a good experience. We didn't always agree. We didn't always get along, but there was mutual respect. And so that went a long way for me in the profession.
Well, you touch on those important factors like empathy and respect and understanding. Those are key factors that really help bridge conversations, even when there isn't agreement. Because you don't always come to agreement. You always need to, right? But that doesn't mean you can't have a civil conversation with an understanding on how to go forward. Oh, that is amazing stuff. So I take it that you didn't get a Bank of America tattoo, and you might have had some other places of employment. What else showed up in your future?
Well, I went back, and this is, I'm sure, pretty common for a lot of appraisers. So after I was asked to depart from Bank of America, do a layoff, we had another layoff.
Oh yeah,
back in, this is like the late mid 90. No, I'm sorry, 2012, 2013, somewhere in there.
Oh, so you wrote it out with them through the.
Oh yeah. I thought I was playing clear. I thought I was playing.
Oh yeah.
But no,
that's behind me now.
Yeah. I got the win on my sales, but no, that really didn't happen. So we did have another layoff, and I was let go. And then from there, so the interesting part of my career at that point is I became a reviewer, because those are the kind of jobs, but there wasn't a lot of management appraisal jobs. So I became a reviewer, and I really hadn't been a full-time reviewer. I managed reviewers and I managed staff appraisals, but I never was a reviewer full-time.
Okay.
That was probably the best experience for me, is becoming a full-time reviewer, because I got to see so many different appraisals. And I was appraised all across the country. So I would see so many different properties and how appraisers did things. A lot of it I copied, I stole, because like, man, that's good. But the biggest benefit is I got to understand the perspective of somebody who's reading an appraisal. Right? Is everything clear?
Got it.
Is everything that I explain everything that I need to explain? So I became a much better appraiser, spending, I think, 2 or 3 years, maybe more than that, as a reviewer. More like 4 or 5 years as a reviewer. And that was invaluable, just to be able to use that, get that knowledge of from that perspective of a reviewer. Because as an appraiser, all things in your head, it makes sense, right? That's what I did. Yeah, but where is that in the appraisal? Where is that in the appraisal? This is how I did it. Okay, you got to explain that. So my appraisals got really, really a lot better. I did a lot better detail, a lot better commentary, a lot better note taking, a lot better explaining as a reviewer. So I did that for about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, and then
oh wow, okay,
got a job as my last job before this job at Valigent. I was at Bank of California as a reviewer, and we did primarily high-end. It did portfolio loans, so there's a lot of high-end private banks. So I got the experience of working with a lot of properties, and I had already in my career worked in a lot of different markets. So I'd worked everywhere from South Central to Beverly Hills to Bel Air to Malibu. I'd done all that stuff. So it was really cool to go to all those different markets. And it was a good experience. I mean, it was interesting that, in certain places I would go, they look at me a little funny when I'm driving through the neighborhood. It's like, what are you doing here? I got pulled over quite a bit, and I'm sure other appraisers did as well. But, being a black appraiser in some of these neighborhoods, taking pictures of houses wasn't a good thing to be doing. It's not like I'm kind of casing the joint, right? So I would, so it was funny that I would get, I worked this area called Palos Verdes, up in South Bay area. That was my territory, one of my territories, and I would do all the high stuff out there. So a funny story about that is I would be there probably 3 or 4 days a week. I'd be out there looking at properties, and, knew that it was a nice area, very high end custom homes and all that. So, but pretty much at least once a week, I get pulled over.
Yep. I was gonna say, you must have known some people. People must have known you pretty well after.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, Jeff, good to see you. Why don't you come join us?"
Pretty much it. Hey, Officer Smith, it's Jeff. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? What's going on? Yeah, I got a complaint. They called. They said, "Yeah, no, you're fine." I just have to act like I'm talking to you because they're across the street looking at me talking. So I have to pretend like I'm. But at first it was like, "Give me your card," and they call the office and say, "Yeah, he really works here." But I got to know the officers, and it actually be kind of comical, after a little while, because I knew they were gonna pull me over or pull up behind me, because a lot of times you're sitting. You're not just driving, you're sitting in front of a house. So you're sitting there.
Oh, yeah, you're right there. You're paying attention to it, taking some notes.
Yeah, you're right there. You're trying to take your notes. You're trying to, one of the things I always just try to do is make sure I squared up the property right before I left. Make sure I didn't have to go back and say, oh man, this doesn't square up. So I'd square it up. And then, you'd have to look for your comps back then. You have to look at where you got to drive to your different sales. So I would sit in front of it. And it was never the borrower, obviously. They knew I was there. But it was that neighbor across the street that wanted to know, what are they doing over there? Officer, it's a suspicious person in the neighborhood. So,
happened to me too.
Yeah. So but that was just part of the job. And then it got to the point, it was, like I said, it was kind of comical, but I appraised everywhere. I really enjoy. I went to some celebrities' homes and got to, they normally weren't there. They have their, assistants or whatever. But I got to see some really, really, really nice homes in my career. And so that's the fun part to me is getting, because I'm kind of nosy. So getting to go in and look at people's homes and how they do things and how they set their home up and how I went to some cool music studio. People had cool music studios in their homes and stuff.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that was cool. That's cool. That was fun. That's
way cool. That is way cool. So how does that develop into where you're at today? I mean, you're at a whole nother place in your career and a whole different view of
Yeah, totally different. So Bank of California also had a layoff. So because they went completely commercial basically. So I didn't have a commercial license, which is another challenge. Is I think, early in my career, I did have the opportunity to get a commercial license and work on my MI. But, I said, you know what? That seems boring. I think I'm going to stick with residential. And big mistake, because at that time, I had no idea at that time licensing would take place. And therefore, it would basically make it almost impossible for someone who was residential to become commercial without starting over, right? So you really don't have a nice bridge between commercial and residential like there was before licensing. You could work in residential and start working in commercial, but nowadays you can't do that. So unfortunately. But because of that, and that was probably one of my biggest regrets, is I didn't go ahead at that time and take those opportunities that were there to get a commercial license. But anyway, that's kind of where I am. And so when I got to this job I'm on now, because they should start doing commercial and only no residential work, I got on a job at Veros. And it's been really cool because one of the biggest things that I do when I first got working here is working on their automated review tool. And because I didn't have an automated review tool where I worked, I put all the stuff I always wanted to have in a review tool that would be automated, like check this and check that, so that the review process gets streamlined and I'm not spending a lot of time. So here's the thing with a review, as you know, you can review for certain things and then you miss some obvious stuff, right? Because you get so overly, consumed with one particular thing. So, but that's kind of how that kind of evolved. And so this job, you're a technology company, so which is cool. So I'm learning a lot more about AVMs and technology, which I did know something about as well, because I actually did my AVM, my thesis at Bank of America and my MBA on AVMs. So I knew a little about AVMs. So
that's a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, that worked out really well working at a company. In fact, the CEO Darius said, you did your MBA on AVMs. Let me see your copy of your thesis. I'm like, oh my God, it was like 20 years ago. I found it though, and I took it to him. That's it. I know how to get the job. But yeah, so I remember one funny thing about that is I took my paper into my professor. He read it. He goes, let me tell you, I got a little piece of advice in you, because it turns out that the AVMs performed, even then, this is 20 years ago, they performed pretty well in areas where there was a lot of data. And I was like,
okay.
Pretty good. This is crazy. This is not what I thought, because I was anti-AVM, because I thought I was going to steal my job. So I remember my professor telling me, he said, you know what, Jeff, I'm looking at this appraisal. I got one piece of advice for you. He said, what's that? You need to get in a new profession.
Oh my goodness. Oh goodness.
That's what he told me 20 years ago. And since then, people have been telling me that along the way. But let's get a new profession. But I enjoy it. And I think there's always going to be room for good appraisals, good appraisers, doing good quality work. I don't think that we be replaced by technology. Some cookie cutter stuff, absolutely. But I think that's where that's where the business needs to go. I think appraisers need to focus on being specialists and doing types of putter that don't lend themselves to a lot of automation.
That totally makes sense. And I think that's such a wonderful setup to, love the question. We always appreciate the personal insight, which you've already really touched on. And that is, as you look at the next 3 to 5, even 10 years in the profession, you being, so young at heart and of course, young on the driver's license, what has you optimistic? Like, what do you see coming at us in the future?
There's a couple things I'm really passionate about that I'm really excited about as well. I think there's going to be, because of all the recent knowledge that's going on related to appraisal bias, appraisal, lack of diversity. We're one of the lowest as far as diversity professions in the country, in the appraisal world, and older and, tend to be white male. So I'm excited about some of the things that are taking place in that front. I think that's going to help our profession in a lot of ways. We have a different perspective because, when I was appraising properties in Los Angeles, South Central Los Angeles, I had no problem. I was very comfortable there. I was very comfortable driving through the neighborhoods and very comfortable talking to the homeowners. And not to say that other people aren't, but I think if I were to see as an African American, if I see another Black appraiser, I feel a little bit better. It's like I feel like at least the person understands me a little bit more, versus somebody from a suburban area, 10, 20, 30 miles away. So I think that's going to help our profession as a whole, just give different perspectives, right? We have a very narrow, if your father trained you and his father trained him and his uncle trained him and his cousin, you're getting a very, very narrow view of the world, not just appraisal.
Yeah.
And there is bias in there. There's bias. We all have it. We all have bias. And whether it comes out in your appraisal, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about. Also, the technology piece. I already hit on it. I think there's going to be ways that appraisers can, in my world, as a real/valid, I like to see appraisers not run from technology, but utilize this technology, do a better job at adjustments, using things like, just taking appraisal and taking data from in that appraisal and doing regression analysis and doing those kind of things that most appraisers would just say, you know what, $50 a square foot, that's what I've been using for the last 30 years. I'm gonna stick with that, And now we have so much data, actually it's overload of data, but we have so much information that appraisers can tap into to support their adjustments. So in case there is a bias claim, for example, you got, hey, here's the data that I use. Here's the support that I didn't just make this stuff up. And I think that's going to help the profession as well as adding more diversity. So I'm excited about that. And I see that appraisers can look at ways that they can be more efficient, but also specialize, look at other things outside of lending work. And that's, we don't talk about that enough, but there's a whole world of appraising. My friend Byron Miller is a residential appraiser, and he doesn't hardly do any lending work. I think he just does some VA work.
No.
But there's a whole world of appraising that most appraisers aren't exposed to. And this is the time to do it, right? While it's slow. Learn how to do rural properties, learn how to do partial interest, litigation, all kinds of things.
Jeff, it is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I know we joked about, could it really run, upwards of about an hour? So, Jeff, we're going to have like session 2 sometime, maybe in a future season. I mean, there's just so much more to this, and there's just such a energetic and just visual perspective that you shared through all your stories. And we so very much appreciate it. With that, we just want to say thank you so much, Jeff, for being part of season 2 with Perusing's The Power of Values. And with that, we're going to bring this session to a close. We just want to thank everyone once again for generously sharing the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael.
It's absolutely a pleasure, Jeff. And as we, right here before we sign off, just a quick reminder, just be generous and feel free to share this out, because it's your sharing that really impacts our industry. It helps carry forward this multitude of possibilities, as well as many new jobs are going to get created in the valuation profession that don't even exist right now because of the enhancement of technology and the access to technology. So feel free to keep sharing out this Perusing's The Power of Value. And Jeff, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Perusing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.